to discuss more of this about the referendum, Dr. Bakchos Glass joins us now. He's a writer and human rights activist. Great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us. Now, the question on the ballot, as I touched on for a minute there, is do Australians approve to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? In practice, what does this mean and how would it affect the daily lives of Australians?
In principle, it would not affect the daily lives of Australians who are not of Indigenous extraction, and even Australians of Indigenous extraction. It probably immediately will have very limited impacts, but it is a step in the right direction, and it's a step that needs to be taken and hasn't been taken for many a year. As you pointed out, we as a group have significantly high percentage of our people incarcerated. We've got limited life expectancy against the majority of the population, and there are significant gaps in literacy, numeracy, employment opportunities, and they're not driven because Indigenous people are lazy, because we are any less intelligent than mainstream Australians. It's because there are structural, and I do think they are structural, impediments to Indigenous people progressing.
So do you think that part of the issue, that Anthony Albanese has been up against in his campaign for this vote has been about messaging? I think that to try and get someone's head around what this actually means for Indigenous Australians, whether it's not now but in the future, seems to have been the problem for everyday Australians. Explain why some people have decided that they will vote no.
There is a lot of misinformation floating around. Advance Australia, which is morphed to Fair Australia, has been pushing something you could only call as lies, to muddy the waters as to what the referendum is about and what it's aimed to achieve. One of the main lies that's being pushed by Fair Australia is that this referendum will introduce race into the Australian Constitution. That is absolute rubbish. Race has been part of the Australian Constitution since it was enacted in 1901, and the main race-related section is section 51, sub 26, which gives the Commonwealth Parliament the power to make laws specific to any race it deems necessary. Now, that's in my view, a very dangerous provision to give to any government, and it has been used both positively and negatively to impact on Indigenous Australians. The main negative impact, of course, is the 2007 Northern Territory intervention, which is widely condemned by a large number of Indigenous groups as being racist and ineffective in what it was trying to achieve. And ultimately, it was politically driven, not driven for the right reasons, which was to have a positive impact on people's lives.
So mental health agencies say they're recording marked increases in reports of online hate speech and abuse. Can you talk a little bit about how this referendum is fueling racial tensions and igniting the far right in the country?
I was at a function last night and I was asked that very question. And my statement at the time was, in my 30 years of activism, I've never experienced this level of hate against Indigenous people in Australia. It's something that's new, at least in my experience, and something that is extremely nasty. And I think it's being driven, well, I know it's been driven, at least in part, by the way the coalition, opposition, has been pushing the no vote. And they're pushing the no vote by saying that Indigenous people are going to be getting something that other people haven't got, that there's 40 billion, 50 billion, whatever the figure is, of money that gets spent on Indigenous people each year, and the money's being misdirected, if not deliberately rorted, by the Indigenous community. Now, if people took a minute to drill down to see where that money actually goes, it would become quite clear that the money does not reach the hands of, or not very much of the money reaches the hands of Indigenous communities. Most of it goes in things that every Australian is entitled to, such as unemployment benefits, sickness benefits, the contributions that are allocated to Indigenous people for things like roads, defence, police, things that impact on every single Australian. A very, very small percentage of that money is targeted specifically for Indigenous causes.
Right.
And then the question becomes how much of that money actually is given to Indigenous agencies, or how much of it sits in Canberra and is given to bureaucrats who use the money to impose their views from the top down instead of from the bottom up.
So just briefly before we run out of time, Dr. Bakchos, what do you think? What do you predict? Do you think that this will be a successful yes, or will it be a no vote? There has been some polls to suggest that it will be a no. What's your thoughts?
It's hard to gauge. The people I speak to are all yes, but that's going to be related to the demographic I move in. It would be naive to think that it's a guaranteed. In fact, if the polls are correct, it's going to be a wipeout for yes. I don't know if we can accept the polls as being correct.
Okay.
But at the very least, we can keep fighting until the polls close on Saturday.
All right. So if it's a no, it could be a big stain on Australian history, but we'll have to wait and see. Dr. Bakchos, really appreciate your time.